the silent gardener of Whisper Creek. He turned idyllic town gardens into beautiful, silent graves. But one detective, haunted by his own past, refused to let the truth stay buried. Whisper Creek wore its tranquility like a well-fitted coat, a comfortable deception that hid the chill underneath. It was a town of manicured lawns, Sunday potlucks, and secrets watered as faithfully as the prize-winning roses. A ghost of a case, cold for a decade, walked beside Detective Miles Corbin every day, a constant, silent partner on his patrols. It was the face of a boy had never found, a failure that had etched itself into the lines around his eyes and soured the taste of his morning coffee. So when Sarah Jenkins, a librarian with a fondness for stray cats and Russian literature, vanished without a trace, Corbin felt the old ghost stir. On the surface, it was clean. Too clean. Her car was in her driveway, her purse on the kitchen counter next to a half-eaten apple. The only thing out of place was the vibrant, almost unnaturally perfect bed of black bat flowers blooming by her front walk, a species nobody in the county had ever seen before. They were exquisite, their dark petals like folded velvet, and they hadn't been there the week before. Her neighbors, when questioned, all said the same thing. Oh, Arthur Finch was just here. He did wonders with her garden. Arthur Finch. The name was spoken with a reverence usually reserved for saints or master craftsmen. He was the town's silent artist, a man who communicated through soil and root, transforming drab yards into botanical wonders. He was a slight man, with dirt permanently etched into the lines of his hands and eyes that seemed to look straight through people, more interested in the space they occupied than the person within it. Corbin's initial interview with him was a study in placid misdirection. Finch spoke of soil pH and sunlight requirements, his voice a low, calm murmur. He remembered Sarah fondly, a quiet soul who appreciated his work. Had planted the bat flowers as a gift, a touch of the exotic for a woman who dreamed of faraway places. It was all so reasonable, so perfectly plausible, that Corbin's captain told him to move on. It was likely a runaway, a woman tired of small-town life. But Corbin couldn't shake the image of those flowers, their dark beauty thriving where a life had just been extinguished. 2 months later, when old Mr. Abernathy, a retired history teacher who lived 3 blocks from Sarah, also disappeared, Corbin felt a cold dread crystallize in his gut. A Bernethus dog was found whining at the back door, its water bowl empty, and in his backyard a new magnificent Japanese maple stood, its leaves a shade of crimson so deep it seemed to drink the light. A tree that, according to his bewildered son, Abernathy had never ordered. The receipt, however, was on the old man's desk, signed and paid in full. The landscaper, of course, was Arthur Finch. Corbin began a quiet, obsessive inventory of Finch's work. He spent his evenings driving through Whisper Creek, not looking at the houses but at the gardens. He photographed them, cataloged them, noted the sudden appearance of rare, exotic flora in the yards of people who seemed least likely to request them. He saw a pattern, a terrifying, beautiful, silent signature. Each masterpiece was a monument. Each unique plant a tombstone. He was building a map of the missing, a cemetery hidden in plain sight, celebrated by the very community it preyed upon. The other officers at the precinct started to avoid his gaze. They saw a man chasing shadows, unhinged by a decade-old failure. His captain gave him a final warning. "Drop it, Miles. You're seeing ghosts where there are only flowers." But Corbin knew he wasn't. He could smell the decay beneath the perfume of the blossoms. He was no longer just hunting for a missing person. He was tending to a garden of the dead, and the silent gardener was still at work. He started digging into Finch's past, a task that proved maddeningly difficult. The man had no digital footprint, no social media, no angry ex-wives or disgruntled business partners. He had simply appeared in Whisper Creek 15 years ago. A quiet man with a preternatural talent for making things grow. Corbin pulled property records, tracing back every client Finch had ever had. He cross-referenced them with missing persons reports from the entire state, going back years. The work was a slow, agonizing crawl through paperwork and dead ends. He'd sit in his small, cluttered office late into the night, the faces of Sarah Jenkins and Mr. Abernathy staring back at him from a corkboard, their smiles mocking his impotence. The town's admiration for Finch was a wall he couldn't seem to breach. People would describe him as gentle, meticulous, a true artist. They'd talk about how he'd listen, really listen, to their dreams for their little patch of earth and then make them real. He was more than a gardener. He was a therapist, a confessor, a silent friend. This public perception was Finch's greatest shield. How could a man who created so much beauty be capable of such ugliness? Corbin felt like he was screaming into a soundproof room. The evidence was circumstantial, a thread of coincidence that felt strong as a cable to him but flimsy as a spider's web to everyone else. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that there were others. Other gardens. Other graves. He just had to find the one loose thread that would unravel it all. The breakthrough, when it came, wasn't a flash of lightning but the slow, patient erosion of a stone. Corbin's life had shrunk to the four walls of his office and the lonely cab of his unmarked sedan. Sleep was a foreign country he no longer had a passport for. He lived on a diet of stale donuts and lukewarm coffee. His world colored in the beige of manila folders and the stark black of printed text. He started his search at the source, the very soil Finch tilled. He compiled a list of every major nursery and botanical supplier within a 500-mile radius, a task that earned him more than a few weary sighs from the department's administrative assistant. He spent days on the phone, his voice growing hoarse, describing Arthur Finch, asking about large cash purchases of exotic flora. Most calls were dead ends. Nursery owners were busy people, their memories a chaotic jumble of Latin names and seasonal orders. But Corbin was persistent, a terrier with its teeth sunk into a root. He learned more about soil acidity, root rot, and aphid infestations than he'd ever cared to know. The ghost of the lost boy, a 10-year-old named Leo, was a constant presence. Leo had vanished from a town fair, a place filled with laughter and lights and hundreds of witnesses. Yet no one saw a thing. The case file was a monument to his failure, a collection of maybes and might-have-beens. He saw the same pattern here, a predator hiding in the open, using the town's own sense of security as camouflage. The connection had been searching for finally sprouted from a small, family-run operation in the next state over, a place called the Gnarled Root. The owner, a man named Silas, was as weathered as his nursery's name, with a voice that sounded like gravel being slowly churned. At first, Silas was cagey. He didn't like cops. But Corbin didn't sound like a cop anymore. He sounded like a desperate man, and Silas, for reasons of his own, responded to that. Yes, he remembered a man fitting Finch's description. Quiet fellow, knew his plants, always paid in cash, crisp $100 bills. He came by every few months. Corbin felt the familiar, electric hum of a real lead. He asked what Finch bought. Silas paused, and Corbin could hear the man thinking, pulling the memory from the earth. He buys the unusual stuff, Silas said. Things that need attention. But it was the other purchase that made the hairs on Corbin's arms stand up. Finch was his only customer for a custom-blended soil additive, a highly specialized mix. Its primary components were bone meal, a nitrogen-rich compound, and a specific strain of mycorrhizal fungi. Silas explained in his gravelly tone that the blend was designed for one purpose: to accelerate decomposition at a startling rate while promoting incredibly aggressive root growth in the surrounding plants. The fungi would break down organic matter, anything, and the plant's roots would draw the nutrients in, pulling them deep into the earth, leaving almost nothing behind. It was, Silas noted with a dry chuckle, a way to get rid of a dead deer in your backyard without anyone ever knowing. Corbin's hand tightened on the receiver. He felt a wave of nausea and triumph wash over him. This was it. This was the how. Finch wasn't just burying his victims. He was feeding them to his gardens. The beautiful, exotic plants were not just tombstones. They were the evidence, actively consuming the very thing Corbin was trying to find. The knowledge was horrifying and validating all at once. He wasn't crazy. He drove out to the Gnarled Root the next day. Silas showed him the receipts, a neat stack of carbon copies detailing years of cash transactions. Finch's signature was a simple, elegant script, as unassuming as the man himself. Armed with this new knowledge, Corbin felt a shift in the dynamic. He was no longer just reacting. He could be proactive. He decided to pay Arthur Finch another visit, not at his home, but in his element. He found him tending to the public gardens in the town square, kneeling in a bed of delphiniums, his hands working the soil with an almost reverent care. Corbin approached slowly, casting a long shadow over the flowers. He didn't mention the disappearances. He didn't mention the soil. He talked about plants. He asked Finch, with feigned casualness, about the challenges of dealing with poor soil quality, about how one might go about enriching the earth for a particularly deep-rooted specimen. He watched Finch's hands, how they stilled for a fraction of a second. He watched his eyes, the placid blue pools that, for the first time, seemed to register Corbin not as a piece of the landscape, but as a potential threat. Finch's answer was textbook perfect, a calm, knowledgeable lecture on compost and aeration. But as he spoke, he never once met Corbin's gaze. He kept his eyes on the flowers, on the dark, rich soil he was cultivating. Corbin knew then that Finch knew. The silent, one-sided conversation had been heard. The gardener was aware of the pest in his garden, and Corbin had a chilling thought. A good gardener is an expert at getting rid of pests. The final move in the silent game had to be Corbin's, and it had to be perfect. He knew a direct confrontation was useless. Finch would deny everything, his placid demeanor an impenetrable shield. The soil additive, while suspicious, wasn't illegal. Corbin needed to connect Finch not just to the disappearances, but to a specific body. He needed to turn one of the gardener's living monuments back into a crime scene. His focus narrowed to a single garden, the one belonging to the first victim he'd connected to Finch, Sarah Jenkins. The blackbat flowers were still there, thriving with a dark, sinister vitality. He needed a warrant to excavate, and for that he needed more than a hunch and a nursery owner's testimony. He needed to provoke the gardener. Corbin's plan was born of desperation and a deep understanding of his adversary's psychology. Finch wasn't just a killer. He was an artist, a narcissist whose medium was life and death. His gardens were his legacy, his masterpieces. To threaten one would be to threaten his very identity. Corbin leaked a story to the local paper. A small, seemingly innocuous piece about the town council's new beautification initiative. The article mentioned plans to modernize the town square, which would involve uprooting several of the older, more established garden beds to install a new, modern water feature. The beds mentioned, of course, were Finch's pride and joy. It was a lie, but a plausible one. He then arranged for a survey crew, 2 uniformed officers in a city truck, to start taking measurements around the square, right in front of Finch's delphiniums. He watched from his car as Finch observed the activity, his calm facade finally showing cracks. The gardener's hand, usually so steady, clenched and unclenched at his sides. The bait was set. That night, a storm rolled into Whisper Creek, a violent squall that lashed the town with wind and rain. It was the perfect cover. Corbin, clad in dark rain gear, sat in his car across the street from Sarah Jenkins' empty house. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but his gut, the same one that had screamed at him for months, told him to be there. Just after 2 in the morning, a dark van, the same one Finch used for his business, pulled up quietly. The side door slid open, and Arthur Finch emerged, a shadow in the storm. He moved with a purpose Corbin hadn't seen before, carrying a shovel and a large, heavy-duty tarp. He went straight for the bed of blackbat flowers. Corbin's heart hammered against his ribs. He had him. Finch was moving the evidence. He was trying to save his masterpiece, and in doing so, he was about to unearth his crime. Corbin let him work for a few minutes. Let him get his hands dirty. Let the rain mix with the sweat on his brow. Then he turned on his headlights, the beams cutting through the downpour and pinning Finch like an insect. He stepped out of the car, his own service weapon feeling heavy and solid in his hand. For a moment, the 2 men just stood there, separated by a garden of graves, the only sound the drumming of the rain. Finch didn't look surprised, only disappointed. He dropped the shovel, the clang of metal on wet pavement echoing in the night. The excavation, authorized by an emergency warrant, began at dawn. They didn't have to dig deep. Beneath the intricate root system of the bat flowers, wrapped in the same kind of tarp Finch had brought with him, they found what was left of Sarah Jenkins. And in the soil, forensic analysis found concentrated traces of the same custom blend from the gnarled root, along with human DNA. The case broke wide open. Once Finch's method was known, gardens across Whisper Creek and 2 neighboring towns were carefully excavated. They found Mr. Abernathy beneath his Japanese maple. They found others, victims of opportunity, people whose absence wouldn't be immediately noticed. And in a quiet corner of a public park in a town 50 miles away, beneath a weeping willow that Finch had planted 15 years prior, they found the small, skeletal remains of a 10-year-old boy. Leo, the ghost that had walked with Corbin for a decade, was finally at peace. Arthur Finch never confessed. He remained silent through his arrest and trial, a placid, empty vessel. He simply tended to a small, pathetic weed that grew in a crack in his cell's concrete floor, his hands moving with the same gentle care. For Corbin, the victory was quiet, devoid of triumph. He had closed the case, but the tranquility of Whisper Creek was forever shattered. The beautiful gardens were now seen for what some of them were: silent, beautiful graves. Driving through town, he no longer saw just flowers. He saw the faces of the lost, their silent stories finally told. He had faced the monster hiding in the petunias and won. He could finally taste his coffee again.